What is up, Internet Basketball Junkies? Welcome back to our advanced coaching course. We're taping this episode live as an experiment, but today we're going to go beyond play diagrams and scouting reports and dig into some of the philosophical levers that actually shape how your team plays. So today I'm joined by Coach Kramer. We're breaking down one of the most foundational elements of winning basketball, which is tempo. This session is built around my guide, Tempo for Talent, which is all about understanding how to create the game that's most favorable for your roster. Every team has strengths, every team has limitations, and the best coaches are engineering the type of game that gives their players the highest chance to succeed. So in this conversation, Coach Kramer and I are going to walk through, how to deliberately speed up a game, how to slow down a game and control possessions, how to blend tempos and change gears strategically, and most importantly, how your team's talent, depth, and identity should drive the tempo you choose as a coach. So whether you have a run and gun roster, a physical half-court group, or a team that needs multiple pace identities to survive a long season, understanding tempo is definitely a competitive edge in coaching. And this isn't just theory, it's a framework for building a system that maximizes your personnel and minimizes your opponent's strengths. So let's dive in now. Coach Kramer, welcome. Thanks for joining me here.
As always, Coach Hack, it's good to do it. Looking forward to another Sunday evening of basketball talk. Always fun.
So this will be an interesting discussion. And before we really get into the nuts and bolts of it, there's a couple kind of lead-in questions that I had for you. And I was thinking of you personally as a coach in your coaching career. What kind of schemes have you used personally to kind of manipulate the tempo of a game intentionally? I know that you're a fast break offense kind of guy. I know that you've done a lot of gap defense, but just from schemes that you've used through your coaching career, thinking about how they affect the tempo of a game.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's anything you can do as a coach that will impact a game, a season more than manipulating your tempo to fit your team. One of the most, I don't want to say drastic because drastic sounds desperate, but like one of the biggest changes that I ever made in my coaching career was after I had been a head coach for about 6 years. I'd been coaching rosters that were typically fairly small. We were really guard oriented. It wasn't a very big school. Every now and then we had a big kid, quote unquote, come through, and he'd be 6'3" or 6'4". So what I really got tired of doing, Matt, was going toe to toe with the kind of schools that we had to beat. Playing half court offense against bigger, stronger kids all the time. And, you can get in the weight room, but you can't make them taller. And so, we did all, playing in. And so after looking at that for a couple of years and through a rebuilding process, I thought that it was time for me to find ways to get my players in the open court consistently. And we really committed in the summer of 2006 to a really, we called it the Phoenix Suns pace, because back then the NBA wasn't playing the way it is right now. Only the Suns were playing that way. And it quite frankly didn't just change our program, but it kind of changed the dynamics of high school basketball in our classification, in our district for several years, because we were going up and down the floor like those teams were. And it really makes an impact, even more so than I think X's and O's. So tempo is something that's near and dear to my heart. I wouldn't necessarily say if any one thing saves a career, but I would say that that running game that we committed to and really committing to that pace of play on the offensive end, it definitely enhanced my career. And it's something that I believe deeply in. And so I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, you're often credited with kind of bringing that fast break style to Stark County, the way that the Phoenix Suns were doing it. And your Fairless teams, they overcame some serious physical disadvantages in the teams that you had to compete against in your tournament to be able to play those teams on an even playing floor. So I think about my coaching career, and I like to mix a fast-paced offensive style with a slower defensive style. So that combination is interesting because it allows you to do a few things. And if you're mixing a fast offense with a fast defense, you're really forcing your opponent to play your style. If you're mixing a slow offense with a slow defense, you're really forcing your opponent to play your style. But when you mix up like what I've done here throughout my coaching career, playing fast on offense and slow on defense, then you can kind of wiggle in different schemes to tailor to the game that you want to play. So we always had our slow defense, which would just be a gap man-based half-court defensive system. And if we were playing against a team that were better than us, we might dial down the transition offense a little bit just to control the tempo of the game. But the opposite end of that is true. If we have our fast offense with our high-powered transition, we might go to more of like a diamond press look to speed up the game if we're playing against a team that we want to kind of put our foot on their throat and squash them early. So understanding stylistically how you play and how you can tinker with that to give your team the best chance in any individual game is interesting. And, that's really what we're going to bounce around here today. So there's kind of two philosophies here, Coach, where some coaches like to have a preferred style of play and they fit their roster into that style of play. And then other coaches kind of look at their roster and then determine their schemes based on the personnel that they had. Where would you fit yourself in terms of those ideas?
I mean, that's a great question. I think our tempo was the result of, my looking at our personnel and just recognizing that we had to create a game that gave us a chance to win. We were competitive, against even some of the better teams. What I was finding is so often it came down to having to grind out possessions. And when you're playing bigger and stronger people all the time, it's really hard to grind out baskets, consistently over and over and over late in close games in a half court. So with me, it was more of a, necessity kind of being the mother of invention, right? And again, one of the things that you have to be, very clear about is that just because you say you're going to run doesn't mean that every game is going to be 92 to 88, right? There are things that other teams can do to slow you down. So it's not really about getting the score up high. It's just about, as often as possible, getting the best shot possible before the defense gets set on the offensive end. I think you made an interesting point with the fact that you play a slow defense. I would say that we were probably in that category as well. We would extend it some against teams that we thought we could, like you said, step on their throat early. But it wasn't necessarily a situation we were playing fast on offense and then jumping into a full court press, and playing all kinds of kamikaze on defense. We would play some extended 3/4 court defensive presses, some 2-2-1. We played some 1-2-2. We had a 1-3-1 in half court that we really liked against teams that like to run their man-to-man offenses that, really served us well. And I was more of a mix and match type of a guy on defense, again, because our personnel was not one that was going to be able to, over the course of 32 minutes, stop bigger, stronger teams in a chest-to-chest game consistently enough to win. And I think that, fast pace on O and I would say slower pace on defense is one that would probably fit what I was doing as well, although I never really looked at it like that.
Yeah, so thinking about creating the pace of the game that you want, there's an example in the guide that I wrote that I wanted to give and get your take on it. But I popped up on the screen this cheat sheet for creating the type of tempo that you want to create. So there's examples here that we could look at of what a fast offense with a fast defensive scheme might look like, examples of schemes or strategies you could use. And then there's examples of a fast offense with a slow defense, or a slow offense with a fast defense, or a slow offense with a slow defense. So these are all examples of if you were trying to get to a desired style of play, these are some of the systems and strategies that you could use. But my example that I give in terms of creating tempo for a game is that if you had to take your best Fairless team that you ever had, Coach, and you had to play against the 1992 Dream Team, would you rather that game be 1 possession long or 100 possessions long? What do you think, Coach?
Well, I want a 1 possession game there, Coach, and I want the ball first.
Yeah, so that's kind of the thinking with understanding tempo, is that if you know you're outmanned from a talent standpoint, you probably want less possessions to sort out who's ahead at the end of those that many possessions. So in a one possession scrimmage against the dream team, maybe David Robinson falls down and your guy gets a wide open layup and you win the game, but that's not going to happen on the 99 other possessions if you extend this fictitious game out. So it doesn't always have to be that way. There's a lot of teams even now that are trying to manipulate tempo to play fast to overcome some of their deficits. But generally speaking, usually you want to shrink the game, shrink the size of the game if you're outgunned, and you want to speed up and increase the number of possessions if you have the most talent. Does that make sense? Does that hit home with you?
Oh, 100%. I mean, I definitely believe that. And so what has to happen if you want to play fast on offense, and there's shades of gray with that, right, Matt? Because
Absolutely.
when we're running, I mean, I want us to run. If we feel like we can get advantages running the floor and getting shots before the defense is set, we want to do that. But then we also have to be smart enough if we don't get that shot in those games where we might be outmanned a little bit to if we don't get the shot we're looking at, settle in and run some offense, right? So there's there's always, a grain of salt, I think, that you have to, kind of to throw into, some of this stuff when you don't have the best team. Does that make sense? I mean, there were times when I was in Georgia with Milton. I mean, I knew we were, we had the better team. We're going to get as many possessions as we can out of this game. And the more possessions there are, the better chance we have of winning. And we wanted the exact opposite. So I've been on both ends of it. And, I kind of understand. You really have to know your personnel to be able to manipulate tempo to fit your best chances to win.
Yeah, so the first thing we're going to look at here is if we're trying to play fast on offense, here's kind of the key questions that we need to ask ourselves and answer. And all of these different options could be used together, but or just you could piecemeal it where you use a couple of them, but not all of them. But the first decision that you have to make is how are you going to transition off of a missed shot by your opponent or a turnover by your opponent? And this is probably the most important one because a lot of coaches teach a primary break where they're transitioning at a fast pace off of a made shot. But in theory, there should be more transitions from defense to offense off of missed shots and turnovers than there are off of made shots. So we are both into this kind of fire offensive fast break where you're going to get the ball, you might outlet it, or you might be your own outlet. You're going to fill lanes and you're going to sprint down that court. And, so much of basketball nowadays, especially at the NBA level and the college level, that's just the baseline. That's like admission to the game is pushing tempo and trying to score in transition. So a lot of coaches through analytics are figuring out that a lot of your most efficient opportunities on offense come in the first 6 or 7 seconds of a possession, and they're tailoring systems to explore those in great detail. But if you want to create a fast-paced offense, I think probably the number one thing that you need to do is commit to a running game when you're acquiring the ball off of a missed shot by your opponent or a turnover by your opponent. Any thoughts on creating a fast game with this system right here, your FIRE system?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, right? We asked that question. We always start with made shot and organization because it's easier to get organized on a made shot, right? Because someone's got to take the ball out of bounds, and you're a little bit more, likely to be in a certain spot when the ball comes in bounds. The second phase of the teaching part that I always do with my teams is what are we going to do on missed shots and turnovers. We still need to be somewhat organized, but they need to be general rules and not real, not real stringent. You have to be here, you have to be there, because the last thing you want guys to do is to be running to spots on a floor where there already are advantages that have been created, like as soon as the possession's been gained. So it's interesting, and again, it's a harder thing to control as a coach, where your guys are standing when you gain possession on a missed shot or a turnover. But there are definitely scenarios that you can simulate in practice that teach players how to read the floor and get to the spacing that you would like them to get to if a shot does not occur in the first 4 or 5 seconds of gaining possession, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so if you're talking about a primary break off of a made shot by your opponent, there's a lot of controlled variables in that. I can get my point guard to an outlet box. I got my 2 on the right wing. I got my 3 on the left wing. I got my 4 taking it out. I got my 5 rim running. I can lay all that out ahead of time, and it's the same each time as the ball goes through the net. But what you're talking about is, if you're trying to transition off of a missed shot or turnover, you can't really control who gets the rebound or who comes up with the turnover. If your 2 is on the left side, obviously you're not going to run them all the way across the court to get on the right side. So you put general principles in play where, we would say 2 and 3 get to the closest rail and sprint that rail. And if you're both on the same side, you could stay there and make a paired side, or you could push one through to fill the opposite side corner by running underneath the basket. You could have interchangeable pieces with your 4 and your 5, where if your 5 rebounds, your 4 is going to rim sprint, or if your 4 rebounds, your 5 is going to rim sprint. So this is exactly what we're talking about. You're transitioning off of a made basket is easier to control, but it happens less frequently than transitioning off of a rebound or a turnover.
You hope so anyway, right?
You would hope so.
Yeah.
Most games that I've coached, my teams and the opponent's team are probably going to be under 50% from the field, but occasionally they might eclipse that 50% mark. But there's also this concept of transitioning on a dead ball, and this would be the most infrequent thing that happens. But what comes to mind with this is sideline breaks off of a free throw. So you don't have an advantage necessarily when the other team's shooting a free throw, everybody's lined up on the free throw line, but you can use a sideline break where you inbound the ball to your point guard kicks it up to the sideline around half court, and then that player is looking to kick it up to the corner, and then you've got a rim sprinter that's posting up under the rim. Have you seen that kind of chain sideline break before, Coach?
Yeah, I've seen it, Coach. I've honestly, I've never run it, but I've had to coach against it, and it's something that I believe defensively you have to really be aware of if you know the other team has that, because typically teams that do that are pretty good at it, right? It's something they practice, and it's I always talk about there are ways for coaches within a 32-minute game to steal some baskets. And I always think about with backdoor plays and things like that, maybe trapping out of a timeout. Maybe if you can help your team with 8 to 10 points in a game, you may be able to influence the outcome of that game. And I think that sideline break is one of those ways. So on the defensive side of that, if that's in the scouting report, you have to really be aware that a team's doing it. On the flip side of that, with me, from a dead ball situation, we were more likely to run directly into what I call our Chicago secondary action, which is a series of things that we ran with some different trigger passes and some different actions and reads that would immediately quick hit the defense, even if they were set, in a way that was almost like a second wave of a fast break. So it was kind of the way that I like to do it. But like I never really played for a coach or coached under a coach that had that sideline break after a free throw. So it's just not something that's a part of what I've done, but like it's definitely an intriguing possibility.
Yeah, I think you've segued us into our next topic here pretty seamlessly, and that is to create a faster paced game, you want to use more of a conceptual style of offense instead of a patterned style of offense. So it takes time to get your point guard and get all your guys in the right alignment and make an entry pass and then run offense from there. But if you're running like what you're talking about with your secondary break that's based on triggers, you can just get into your scoring action a lot faster. So if you're trying to play fast, if you're trying to create a faster tempo to a game, you want to think more about concepts and alignments as opposed to set plays and getting set up. And I've got to have my 2 on the block, and I've got to have my 5 on the elbow, and I've got to have my point guard make the entry pass here. All of that just slows down the style of play. And you're seeing this in the NBA where all the teams are playing at a very fast pace. And a lot of it is based off of a 5-out transition where they've got some secondary options to flow directly into. It's a lot of this pistols and 21 series options, which are all kind of conceptual style of basketball. They're not walking the ball up and getting to an alignment, making an entry pass and exploring all that. They're playing out of transition as quickly and as seamlessly as possible. So how much have you done conceptual style of offense? I know that you use that out of your transition. It's a kind of a trendy thing right now in basketball. How much did that creep into your coaching career, Coach?
I mean, I was doing it a lot before a lot of people were doing it. That's one of the things I like to say because, and again, it was out of necessity. We just had to find different ways. Because like you said, that resetting and then having to make an entry pass and a couple pin downs and fighting to get the ball to a wing and, it just did not fit my players. And so it was almost all conceptual, right out of transition. And it was built on several reads, right? If the point guard or whoever was advancing the ball hit the wing, and filled the ball side corner, we had some old Chicago Bulls triangle concepts that we were in that were modified to fit high school basketball perimeter oriented team. If the ball went side to side, so from whoever was advancing to that lag guard, that trail guard, we might get right into that, what would look a lot like Princeton's chin. So it was a lot of, read that first pass, what I would call a trigger pass, and it would signal or trigger to the rest of our guys what sequence of actions we were in and what concept we would be in to start that possession. And I got to tell you, Matt, I think the better you get at conceptual offense, I think the less offense you have to run a lot of times. It was very seldom where we would have to turn that over 3 and 4 times to try to find a shot, right? Because the team a lot of times was retreating. I find that it puts the defense on its heels even when it's balanced because they're just having to see things a lot faster. And it's different than, back in the day, especially with, a lot of things like, I'm not definitely not saying anything disparaging about these offenses, but a lot of the 5-out pass and screen away, flex type things, sometimes stuff like that you were seeing all over the place. It just made it harder to defend because nobody else was doing it, right? At first. But then I realized it's hard to defend because it's hard to defend, Yeah. I mean, it's just lots harder to defend when you're not lined up and, and down in a stance and you've already talked it all the way through and let the other team slap the floor and get ready to play defense. It just makes defense harder.
Yeah, and I think a lot of coaches are realizing these days that kind of the point of offense is to try to create advantages and score the basketball. It's not to have these pretty flowing patterns. So while some coaches might, make one pass, have a get action and try to score off of that, that takes 5 seconds. But to make an entry pass and reverse the ball and run a shuffle screen into a stagger, that takes 15 seconds, 20 seconds. So if you're looking for pace of play, it would be simple, more conceptual style of offense and less of the flowy patterns. Kind of the last principle here in terms of thinking about creating a fast offense, Coach, is your offensive rebounding approach. So if you want to create a faster paced game, you're going to attack the offensive boards with more authority, with more bodies. And what that does is get you more possessions and more shots by getting offensive rebounds. And it weakens your transition defense a little bit. So you're kind of encouraging your opponent to play at a faster pace and attack you in transition a little bit. So you want to have, from a philosophy standpoint, you want to think about your rebounding in terms of pace of play. If you're sending nobody to the offensive boards, you're not going to get offensive rebounds, but you're going to have a half-court defense that's set every time. If you're sending a lot of people to the offensive boards, 3 or 4 players even, you're going to get extra possessions by getting offensive rebounds, and that's going to make an increased possessions on the total for the number for the game, Coach. What was your philosophy on offensive rebounding? I always like to kind of send 3 to the glass no matter what, and then use like a halfback, fullback kind of system with my 1 and 2.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great question. I got a great conversation with Mike Dunleavy Sr. We were sitting at a BW3s or Buffalo Wild Wings, whatever you want to call it, back in the summer of 2016. Mike was in town to do a thing with NBA TV, and I pointedly asked him the question, when I'm watching an NBA game, right, why sometimes do I see that nobody goes to the offensive glass? And his response was very simple, right? If you don't have a great offensive rebounding team, if you don't have a great rebounding team, the NBA, if you don't get 5 guys back to play defense, you're giving up a bucket. The talent is so great. So like, it's not, those guys are not being lazy. That's the philosophical approach that coach is taking to get balanced defense, to try to slow the game down, to keep the score down. And I never had really heard that before. I sometimes thought when I was watching those games, guys just they were tired. But it's a very, very pointed, strategy that those guys are using at that level to do what you're talking about, to get balanced defense. So like, if you believe that the risk of going to the offensive boards doesn't outweigh the rewards, then why not just put 4 guys back? Let one guy mess around in there, and if he's not going to get it, he'd get back 2, and we can play defense. So I think that there's some merit to that. If you don't feel like you can gain advantage in the offensive boards, I will tell you this, as a coach that likes to run, one of the things that I found was a huge benefit in implementing a fast-paced offensive game is that opposing coaches, even coaches that had tremendous advantages size-wise on us on the offensive boards, tended to back off and send 2 or 3 back, sometimes 4, to try to keep us out of our running game. And in kind of an indirect way, we narrowed the gap on the boards because teams were afraid to go to the boards on us. Does that make sense?
Yeah, just the threat of you scoring in transition made them take less of a focus on getting offensive rebounds and more of a focus on getting back on defense. And we know
I'm sorry. I always felt like when I saw that happening that we had won part of the game before the game ever started, right? Because I was worried about offensive rebounding, and they're not offensive rebounding. I think they had a huge advantage there. And I can't tell you, there was probably 5 or 6 pretty big games in my career. One was a tournament game that I feel like, we had a 6 or 7 point lead most of the game, and I never felt like we were threatened because I didn't think that team had the courage to try to beat us the way they needed to beat us because they were afraid of our running game. And that's some strategy that the average person wouldn't see. You know what I mean? So we're talking about, everybody thinks strategy is X's and O's, but sometimes it's something as simple as tempo, and it's pretty important. It's pretty important. I've always been a guy to send at least 2, usually 3, and like you said, then halfback and full back. And I think in high school,
hey, Coach, I'm going to interrupt
basketball
you.
days, that you could be probably pretty safe.
I'm going to interrupt you. Hey, your audio is going in and out. If it gets to be a bigger concern, I'll bring it to your attention again. But sometimes you're popping a little bit in and out. But hey, we know that trends in basketball are secular. Things go out of fashion, they come back in fashion. I remember Doc Rivers with the Boston Celtics. They were doing this, no offensive rebounding, sending everybody back. And now things are coming back in vogue where teams are really attacking the offensive boards, and they're figuring out how to offensive rebound and play transition defense. So we're moving on. Those were kind of the topics of how to create a fast offensive system. Now we're going to go to the defensive side. If we want to create a fast game with our defense, here are the schemes that we could use. And the first is more of a pressure denial type of man defense. So in theory, if you're playing a gap-based defense, you're like in a bend but don't break kind of mold, and you're waiting for the opponent to shoot, and then you're going to try to rebound the ball and run your offense. But when you're getting out in the passing lanes, denying passes, you're forcing teams out of their offense. You're getting them to put their head down and go one-on-one. You're trying to create more turnovers. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a denial man defense leading to a faster paced style, but it does help. You can create turnovers, get into your running game quicker. You can take teams out of their patterned offense. If you're a gap-based team and someone's trying to run continuity at a slow pace, if Tony Bennett were to be playing against you, he would run his blocker mover for 35 seconds each possession, and you really have no say in it. But if you're out denying passing lanes and taking things away, you might be able to speed that offensive possession up a little bit. Does that make sense in terms of creating a faster game by using a denial-based man-to-man defensive scheme?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, I coached with a coach that loved to deny that first pass and always the next pass. One pass away from the ball, always up the line, on the line, hand in the passing lane. He believed in that deeply, and it was very effective for him over the years.
Yeah. So the next concept would be using a press defense. And press defense is interesting because just because you're pressing doesn't necessarily mean you create a faster pace to a game, but the style of press that you use can create a faster or a slower type of game. So if I were wanting to create a faster game with a press defense, I might use something like a diamond press, or I might use something like a 2-2-1, the Vance Wahlberg kind of 2-2-1, where they're forcing you up the court and then try and run and jump you from behind. So not just specifically pressing to speed up the game, but the style of press that you choose can definitely speed up a game. And those were two that definitely come to mind here. But even within the concept of a press, like we're looking at a diamond press here, Coach, with these diagrams, how you teach the rotations out of your press can dictate a faster or a slower pace game. So if we're looking at this diagram on the far left, we've had the ball passed in, we've trapped it out of a diamond. Now we've got our weak side rat here in our interceptor. If we rotate these guys sideline and middle, that's going to allow a reversal pass, and then we would shift our defense and build it back on this side. So that might create a more of a slower paced game by just dropping our players that way. This middle diagram reflects the same thing, but they're going to play more even. So instead of rotating sideline and dropping back middle, they're going to split the difference here. So this is kind of a balanced rotation out of a diamond. But really what I wanted to talk about was this concept on the far right out of a diamond press. So if they throw the ball in, we trap it in the corner, we rotate our weak side rat here to take away the reversal pass, and then leave our interceptor in the middle. That's really forcing the ball up the court. So you can use a strategy like this with a rotation behind it that's going to force the opponent to advance the ball, and then they're attacking in transition while you try to build back your defense. So you're taking your chance to try to get your steals early. You're not letting them make an easy horizontal pass to reverse the ball. You're forcing them to attack up the court. And if you're a better team, a bigger, better, faster, more talented team, you will invite them to play in a game like that, because over a larger number of possessions, your talent, your size, your athleticism is going to win out. So does that make sense as using press defense as a tool to manipulate the pace of the game?
I mean, absolutely, Matt. I mean, and I like the way you showed the three diamond presses there, all similar looks to start, and then some different approaches and the way you're going to trap and rotate. Oftentimes once we'd committed to playing a really fast-paced game, we'd see a lot of three-quarter court stuff that wasn't really trying to trap us at all. It was just trying to throw bodies up at us to see if it could get us to make 3 or 4 reversal passes so we couldn't play at the pace we wanted. So, yeah, I mean, there's a number of different ways you can manipulate pace with either full court pressure, or three-quarter court extended, just across half court, definitely.
So the next concept that we'll talk about in kind of increasing the pace of play using your defense would be using trap schemes. So what we're doing here is, if you're playing against a team that likes to use a lot of slow down set plays or continuity patterned offense, you're running traps at them, whether it's a trap the first pass or ball screen trap or whatever kind of trap it would be. But it's really forcing the offense to pick and choose, because when you trap, you're giving up an advantage to the offense. You're basically allowing them to play 4-on-3 beyond that trap. So you're taking a chance to get a turnover. If they move the ball out of the trap, they're in a 4-on-3 advantage. So the dilemma becomes, if you're playing against a team that's trying to slow the pace down or run their continuity offenses or run their set plays, if you trap them and you don't get the turnover, but they don't try to attack you in the 4-on-3 and they try to set it back up, then you have free opportunities to try to get steals with your trap scheme. If they pass it out of the trap and they do attack you 4-on-3, you've at least created a pace of a game, whether they score or not, that's getting them out of their rhythm. That's making them break their continuity, break their set plays, and attack at that given point. So trap schemes are definitely something where you can kind of dictate that the opponent has to attack when maybe they're playing a more passive style of offense. Does that hit home for you, Coach?
Yeah, I mean, 100%, Matt. I mean, I think you hit on 2 good points there as far as the trapping goes. You are putting the other team in an advantage in a 3-on-4 if they can get the ball out of the trap. A lot of people don't understand this, with the trapping. You're going to give up a bucket every now and then if you're doing that. If you commit to that, you as the coach, I would stop short of saying you don't care that you give up a bucket every now and then, but when you do that, you understand that you're going to give up a bucket every now and then. It's worth giving up the bucket to get the pace where you want it. In those cases. And then there's other situations where I know a team wants to slow us down. And we'll get into some, and usually it was man-to-man with me. I wasn't a big diamond guy. I liked man-to-man stuff more. Sometimes we trapped the first pass on the inbound. Sometimes we wouldn't trap until the ball went on the floor. We did it some different ways. But one of the things that one of the ways I would always stay in that man-to-man trap of that full court, really heating teams up, would be if I know I was playing against a team that just at all costs did not want to get into a running game and would do everything they could to pull the ball back out and reset, once they crossed half court and had, quote unquote, broken the press. I mean, to me, and I think you said it, to me, that means we get some free chances to gamble a little bit, and maybe create some steals and some easy baskets. And we know darn well that the other team has been coached really not to go at us. Unless there's nobody in front of them, which is going to be highly unlikely if our rotations are any good at all. So, yeah, I think there's a number of different layers to that, and I think that they're all very interesting. And especially when we committed to the fast-paced offense. I think you said at the beginning, and I really liked the way you said, you really did some different things defensively. A lot of it was slow, but like if you thought you could really jump somebody, then yeah, you'd turn it up sometimes and and have some different things you could do. That's coaching, right? At the high school level, if you're really trying to put your team in the best position to win, you're looking at all angles with that stuff, and that's really what coaching's all about.
Yeah, doubling down on a style of play like fast offense with fast defense is going to force the opponent into your style of play. And then using a combination where you have a fast offense with a slow defense, that allows for maximum flexibility as a coach, where you can tamper one down or amp one up to meet your needs depending on the type of game that you're trying to take off out there. So yeah, all of these decisions are trade-offs as coaches. So if you're going to decide to trap, you've got to live with some 4-on-3 play beyond the trap. But if really what you're about is creating the right pace for the game, then you've just got to live with that. You're going to have to give up some buckets to create the pace. Obviously, as coaches, we're not just going to want to give away a bucket at any point. But if we can make decisions that increase the pace of play, allow us to take chances where we want, that's a trade-off that we've got to be willing to make. So we're still into concepts for our defense to play fast. And the next one is gambling for steals. So you could put like a red light, green light, yellow light type of system in with your team where you're telling them, red light, we're not going for steals right now. Yellow light, go for one when it's there. Green light, run those passing lanes like crazy. But you could use a concept like that. And when you're playing against a team that wants to slow the pace down or is inferior to you in talent or athleticism, you might go to this green style of running the passing lanes where you're looking to create more steals. You may get some to open up a game, and you're also going to be out of position some, which is going to force that defense, the offense, into that same dilemma we just talked about with the traps, where if you go for a steal and get out of position, they've either got to attack that advantage to score, which creates a tempo that you want to play at, or they pull it out and guess what? You just had a free shot at running a passing lane and they didn't make you pay whatsoever. Have you ever manipulated the aggressiveness that your players run the passing lanes in terms of how it would relate to the pace of a game that you're playing?
Man, I'll tell you what, I've never done it on the level that you just explained it. I think one of the great things about, when we talk, Matt, and it's all the kind of things that you share and that we share, and then, the network of coaches that, have kind of come together through all the things that, that you've done and that we've done together. I always learn something new, I never really looked at it like that. We had a full court man-to-man where we would be straight up and there was no trapping, and we were, kind of bluffing at them as they were coming up, and, just trying to put a little pressure on them, maybe make them a little uncomfortable. If they weren't great ball handlers, maybe allow them to make some turnovers where they maybe otherwise wouldn't have. At other times, it was a full out, if we knew that, and we didn't do the red, green, yellow thing, which I think is really intriguing. If I were to do it again, that would be something I would look at. We had we had a call where it was a black call where we were out of our man-to-man full court. We were going to trap the first pass and just be really aggressive the entire possession. Trap the pass, trap the dribble, come from behind, jumping in front. A little more kamikaze than our we call it our 42 soft, where we would let the ball come in bounds, and we would try to heat the dribbler up and maybe get him turned into a bad spot, break the spacing down, and maybe run into a trap here and there. So like that's more the way we did it. Not so much the colors, but I really like that concept. I really like it a lot. And again, I've been fortunate. In some of the things that I share, I try to offer this. I've been on both sides of the ledger, right? I've been the prohibitive underdog, and I've also been, in my time in Georgia, the team that walks in the gym and knows it's going to win most nights before the game ever starts. And one of the things I will say, most upsets happen when the possessions are less. And so, you take that approach on either side that you're on, right? If you're the underdog, understand that the less possessions, the better. If you're the favorite, understand that the more possessions, the better. And, kind of try to manipulate your defensive and offensive approach to fit wherever you stand, with those two extremes and everywhere in between.
Yeah, when I think about my coaching career, we got pushed into this North Coast League when I was at St. Thomas Aquinas, and we would play Villa Angela St. Joe's and Cleveland Central Catholic. And if we just lined up and tried to play those guys normally, it wouldn't go well for us. So we'd have to look to ways to slow down the game and take them out of rhythm and create a game that was favorable to us. But also we would get into our tournament and we would go over to Salem or wherever the tournament was that year. And we would play, United Local or Springfield Local, these rural, smaller schools. So it really forced us to develop a style of play where we could crank it up when we needed to punish a school that we were more athletic than, but also we could scale back when we needed to try to shrink the game to play against a Cleveland Central Catholic or Villa Angela St. Joe's. So it wasn't always fun making those bus rides up to Cleveland to play those teams, but it really did make the tournament games feel like slow motion to us after we'd see that kind of size and athleticism from those teams in our league. So moving on here a little bit, Coach, the last concept in creating a faster pace with your defense would be a transition leak out. So we're looking at our rebounding situation. And if we want to create a faster tempo, we've got to think about not necessarily sending all 5 guys to get a defensive rebound, but we are going to leak out a little bit. Maybe there's one designated guy, or maybe it's a general rule for your guards that they can just kind of get going if they're not in position. But you're trying to create a situation where when you get that defensive rebound, you're in a better position to convert it to points, as opposed to having to walk the ball up and create offense against the set defense. So I think about this a lot when I see some of these high school teams. I watched Costa Kufis play in high school, and Kufis was 7'1". He was going to get all the rebounds. Why do we need to send the 5'8" guard and the 5'9" guard to the boards if the 7'1" guy is going to grab the ball 90% of the time? So I think about things like that, and they're just getting their guards out in transition. And they're going to let the big man do the rebound. But you can take that philosophy and you could apply it to your defensive rebounding, and in turn gear up your offense by having guys down the court when you go to start your offensive possessions. Any thoughts on this transition leak out concept, Coach?
Absolutely. And it's a double-edged sword, right? Because you're going to get burned every now and then. But when I had Chris Lewis at Milton, 6'10", power forward, center mix, and I had a 6'9" stretch 4 with him. I mean, we could cheat. There's no other way to explain it. I had a 6'7" wing, Alex O'Connell, who played at Duke for 3 years there. He was there when Zion was there, and then he transferred to Creighton and finished his last 2 years there. Had a great career at both places, really, and he's still playing over in Venice. And at 6'7", sometimes Alex was our worst cheater. He could be a pretty good rebounder at times, right? But like we had 6'10", Alex was just like my other 2 guards who were both pretty small. He liked to take advantage of the fact that he knew that those kids would get rebounds, and it made our offense really, really hard to stop in transition when you've got two bigs back there like that. I mean, to have one, like you were talking about Kufus, and I watched those teams play at Glen Oak, and he got every rebound. I mean, I had two. You know what I mean? We played some dudes, but like the nights we played your regular teams, it was pretty easy to get into transition off of missed shots because it was pretty much a guarantee that one of those two bigs was going to get the rebound, and they could both run the floor, like a deer. And so their rim runs were really good when they weren't getting the rebound. And it's definitely something that that we did. I find that when you transition and you commit to a fast breaking offense, even when you don't have that big guy, your guards tend to start to cheat a little bit, and you got to really watch, right? Especially if you're smaller, that you're not cheating too much. There's a really fine line there, Matt, and I'm not sure it's definable. You know what I mean? I think you just kind of know it when you see it, right? Well, hey, but you know what? They're missing shots, and we're not getting any running opportunities because they're getting second shots. So it definitely depends on transition. But like if you've got the big guy and you like to run, then leak out if you can get away with it. Definitely.
The last concept here in trying to create a faster pace with your defense would be your instructions to your team on fouling. So when I think about like the Grinnell system, they're the Grinnell system where they're crazy pressure defense, fast-paced offense, subbing 5 in, 5 out, that type of style of play. One of the instructions of the system is that we don't want to stop game flow by fouling at the rim. Right. We want to make them make shots, and we want the game flow to go without sitting there and having free throws being shot and substitutions being made and instructions given by the coach. So even something as simple as how we protect the basket, especially in like fast break situations, that can create a little bit more of a free flowing game with less stoppages and less free throws. So we've covered how to play fast on offense and on defense. And now we're moving into how to create a slower offense. And the first concept here is to eliminate transition. So I think about competing against like Bob Von Kennel's Dover teams through the years, where those kids would all five of them.
Yeah.
All 5 of them would rebound. They would collectively rebound as a team. One guy would get it. He would put that ball under his arm. The point guard would walk back and take it out of his hands. I mean, they wouldn't even outlet the ball 5 feet in advance the court. And the point guard would grab the ball from the big man's hands, directly out of his hands, and they would walk the ball up and then run offense. And that's a style of play. That's not one that I don't think you or I could ever coach or have ever coached, but that is a style of play. And I think about that in terms of like Ben McCollum, who's at Iowa now, but he had so much success in Division II, and he had so much success in his time at Drake, and now he's bringing the same system to Iowa. And they are the slowest paced team in the NCAA, and they win. So, we want to create the game that we want to create. There's lots of ways to win, but you can certainly not even participate in transition offense and still be a winning team. But that's something that if you want to create a slowdown game, if you want to limit the number of possessions, that's one way to do it, where you're just not going to take any chances with your fast break style of play. So fast break, you're going to get some high efficiency shots early in the shot clock. But typically that comes with some turnovers. Usually before teams get really good at playing fast, it becomes them playing a little bit wildly. And if you don't want to take that chance, you can walk the ball up the court. Coach, I could never see you walking the ball up the court like this. Am I right or am I wrong?
Listen, Matt, you touched on one of the most fun games I've ever coached in. Bob Von Kennel's a guy I really respect a lot. I did not have a lot of head-to-heads with him. In fact, I only had one as a head coach. He came into our gym in 2008, January, the number 1 ranked team, Division II team in the state. We were somewhere in the top 10. We were scoring about 78 points a game at the time. They were giving up 32, right? So all those things that you were talking about were happening. And our game plan in that game was, and what the way that Coach Hack just described what they do was not an exaggeration. That's what they did. They'd get the rebound. The point guard would come back. He would take the ball out of the guy's hands, whoever rebounded, and he would walk the ball for 9.9 seconds till he got to the timeline. And we practiced all week because we had a week to prepare. Coming back and doubling their point guard immediately when he got the ball and forcing them to play faster. And I told him I didn't give the layup up. They're not going to look for it anyway. We're going to trap that kid, chase him all over the backcourt with the two closest guys, and we're going to force them to speed it up. And at halftime, we had 32 points, which is what they gave up for a game, right? And we were up, I think, maybe 8 or 9 points. In the second half, they held us to 12, right?
Yeah.
So we went from scoring 32 to 12, and we won the game, I think, if I'm not mistaken, 44 to maybe 39 in a packed gym. If you know anything about Ohio basketball, and Coach Hack, touched on one of the great programs under Coach Von Kennel. He's not just in the Hall of Fame; he's in the Hall of Fame's Hall of Fame, right? In Ohio basketball, and they brought a zillion people from their town and our town. It was a sellout crowd. I mean, it was just a great basketball game, and I think it was the perfect example of everything you're talking about tonight. How sometimes it's not so much about X's and O's; it's about who can instill who can enforce their will as far as pace goes on the other team. And it really was a mixed bag there that night. In the first half, it was us. In the second half, it was them. And the clock ran out, and we just happened to be ahead. It was just a fantastic, strange basketball game.
Yeah, that's one of the most miserable experiences is coaching against Von Kennel. And, they walk the ball up, they run motion offense for like 40 seconds before they find the shot that they want. Everybody's like antsy to get the ball on your team. We get it, and then we like throw it away right away because we're in a frenzy. And then they do the same thing again. They walk the ball up and they run the motion offense for 40 seconds. It's a miserable feeling. But moving on to slow down a game, we talked about taking out the element of transition. But you can also use kind of patterned offense, continuity offense, set plays. All that takes time to organize. All that takes time to read the options and reverse the ball. That is going to be a slower style of play compared to like a conceptual offense or a trigger-based offense that are becoming really popular now. And kind of the next one here would be using delay games. So we're in Ohio. Ohio still doesn't have a shot clock. I've been partial to using delay games in my coaching career, whether it's to wind down a quarter or to, kind of suffocate the end of a game if we've got a lead. So a delay game is definitely a tactic to kind of run clock and make the other team impatient. So I talked about going up to Cleveland Central Catholic and Villa Angela St. Joe's and playing those teams. A lot of our strategy up there would be to kind of spread them out, force them to come out and guard us. And obviously they wanted to create a faster pace. So they weren't going to stand around and watch us just be passive. They're going to come get us. And my thinking is they'll create opportunities for us to score by being impatient if we just spread them out. And they would do that.
Sure.
Both of those teams would do that. And sometimes their athleticism and their talent was hard to overcome. But we really didn't even need much of an offense to play against them. We just needed to play patient enough for them to get out of position and let us attack in a 4-on-3. Have you used much of a delay game concept in your coaching career, Coach?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I like the four corners. I do. I like it, especially if there's no shot clock. I think that, again, at Fairless, we played fast, but we also had, we literally had 4 kids on the floor at a time, oftentimes, that could play point guard. We had a small 5 at 6'3", and his backup was 6'1". I had a kid named Josh Penland who I put at the 4. It was a hybrid position. He was really a second point guard. So when we spread people out, we had 4 kids that could put it on the floor in space and beat you. We had 5 kids on the floor who could catch lined up on the 3-point line and knock a 3-point shot down. So a lot of times when we went to that spread offense, it was to kill some clock, but it was also a very aggressive approach to a delay game, because one of my philosophies with my better shooting team is nothing kills the clock faster than 3 more points, right? That's 3 more they got to go get. And so, I've definitely used it from time to time, and I've had teams use it against my teams from time to time when maybe we had a little bit more than they did. And I think you hit the nail on the head. Defensively against that, you've got to have a plan, and you got to be patient with it. A lot of times when I saw that, especially later in my career, we just get into our 1-3-1, and force some different things to happen. because I wasn't comfortable giving up layups, and I figured if we, at least we got into the 1-3-1 and played it aggressively, they'd be at least teased into maybe taking some shots, right? Because a lot of times when those teams get in that four corners and the coaches said red, meaning they're not going to shoot, that they won't shoot it. But that, that's kind of the way I've combated it as a defensive coach. But yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely got value, and I have used it. It's not popular with the fans, especially the fans of the other team, but like it's something that you can definitely use to level the playing field a little bit, against those, like you said, Cleveland Central Catholics and St. Joseph's, and when we played against Wheeler and Jalen Brown and those kids down in Georgia, and some of the better teams, right? You coach to your advantages, right? You're not there to entertain people. It's not the ballet, it's not a Shakespeare play. It's you're trying to win a basketball game, so you do what you have to do.
Yeah, I would say that definitely the right community can get behind a delay game style. I remember Randy Montgomery's Hoover teams. They would go to that stall and the community would love it. I'm coaching against Tom McBride at Lake. They had like a sideline delay package that they would run, and we would do exactly what you said. When they would go to it, we had like an X hand signal, and that would mean we were flipping into our 1-3-1 on the fly and trying to pressure them out of that delay.
Yep.
But I would say in my coaching career, I took a team to the state finals, and we made a drastic switch mid-season to play 5 guards when things weren't going as well as we had hoped. And what the 5-guard lineup did is it really opened the door for like a death style of delay game for teams. And I'll tell you, our regional semifinal, our regional final, and our state semifinal, all 3 games, we got up about 6 or 8 points at some point, and we went to the delay game with 5 guards that could all handle the ball and spread teams out. And we absolutely just iced every one of those games where we shortened the clock. We created openings by the defense being impatient, and we made the game reach quadruple zeros a lot sooner than it actually would have if we'd have just played those games straight up and down. So delay games is definitely a strategy. If you're trying to slow the game down to limit possessions, you can mix that in. It doesn't need to be your whole game style. We're going to stay in a delay game, but you can mix it in at different times just to slow things down. Or if you're playing against a monster of opponent that's getting a little bit of momentum, you run that just to chill out the fans a little bit and, get the momentum back down in your favor. We're towards the end here, Coach. We've got slow defenses to talk about. So if we're going to use our defense to slow the game down and create less possessions for a total game, one of the first things to think about is to defend less court. So, if we're going to guard, if the opponent is going this way and we're picking them up full court, generally speaking, that's probably going to speed the game up. But if we're retreating everyone back here to quarter court to pick up, we're going to be able to get our defense set. They're not going to be finding advantages in transition, and they're going to have to play against a quarter court defense that's all lined up man for man. So the first thing to think about is just, we may not want to extend our defense. We may want to get everybody back, get the paint packed. And, if they're going to beat us, they're going to beat us shooting over outside shots over a contest instead of beating us down the court and playing advantage basketball in transition. Coach, I'm going to move on here and just think about some more kind of concepts to slow the game down on defense. And a 2-3 zone certainly does that. And a gap man style can certainly do that. These are kind of the same philosophies here, where in a zone we are loading to the ball, but we're doing it out of zone principles. And a gap man scheme is going to load to the ball heavy, but you're going to chase your man around and follow them through screens and all that. So if you're looking to slow the game down, a quarter court zone or a quarter court man-to-man scheme is all something where you can kind of grind out possessions, make them earn it. You're not going to be taking a lot of gambles in the passing lane. You're going to stay in front of people. You're going to make them work the ball around to find their shots. And then when they do shoot, you're going to block out and limit them to one shot. And that would be kind of a recipe to keep the game at a slower pace. Does that make sense to you, Coach?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think those are all really good plans. And absolutely, again, there was nothing more frustrating to my really good running teams than a team that got back well on defense, got balanced, packed it in that quarter court concept that you're talking about, and made us go chest to chest with them offensively. It wasn't fun.
So moving on here, if we're trying to create a slower tempo with our defense, we can use pressing. And people out there are going to say, well, you talked about pressing for creating a faster game. Yeah, you can create a faster game with your press. You can also create a slower game with your press. There's a lot of these tempo control presses, which is like, it could be a 1-2-2, it could be a 2-2-1, but really what they're trying to make you do is use the pass to advance the ball up the court. So if you're making teams, you could extend up the court to slow them down. I never really subscribed to this philosophy. If I was an underdog, I just wanted to get everybody back. But if there was a team like yours, like your Fairless teams, where you're pushing really hard in transition, one approach might be to meet them up the court and to slow that breakdown at kind of the head of the snake there. Were there a lot of teams that could effectively take you out of your transition by using a tempo control press, Coach?
I mean, what it did was it taught me to coach press offense better and put my guys in schemes against those three-quarter court presses where they could continue to attack. And one of the things that I always really push when I'm working with anybody in their transition game is to connect their press offense, to their fast break. And so initially it did, but we had some things that we did against it that allowed us to continue to play fast and take advantage of them and kind of try to pick it apart the same way that we would pick apart a half court defense. Again, the longer you're at a school, the better you're going to get. Obviously, the longer you've run your program, the better you're going to get it at certain things. And by the time I'd been there for 7 or 8 years, there wasn't much that was going to really affect us the way that was intended to affect us. It all works at times, but I feel like when we executed really well, there was not much you could do to slow us down. Maybe a little bit, but like not really. But that was at first when we started to do it, what teams would try, right? We'd see 2-2-1, we'd see 1-2-2, we'd even see some 2-1-2. Listen, I coached with a great, my first 7 years, when I was teaching and coaching as a JV coach and assistant varsity coach at Kansas South, I coached with Henry Cobb, and he was as good a defensive tactician as you will ever see in a high school game. And one of the things that he really did well was he could mix it and match his three-quarter court presses with some really hard denying man-to-man half court, and he kind of taught it all so well that he can manipulate a game just about any way you wanted to. With the different things he could do. When we were in the regional semifinals in 1997, we played was named Andre Sims, and they were a city team that was super athletic, and we were good. So like we weren't like completely overmanned. We were good too, but like we were younger. And they were loaded for bear. And Henry, Coach Cobb that night instituted what it was. The number he used was 36. That was his numbering scheme. The first number was where you pick it up, and the second number was the defense. What we did is we took our 2-3 zone and extended it to three-quarter court, and that's all it really was. It looked like a press to Buchtel, and they were a team that liked to run on makes and misses. And all night long, we got them passing the ball, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times before they ever got into their offense, and it frustrated the living daylight out of them, and it kept the game in a place where we could win it. So, again, quarter court, three-quarter court, if it's coached well, right, there's a pretty good chance that it'll do what you want it to do. And so I think all these things, have potential. With one of the best at manipulating that tempo with lots there, some different thoughts that they kind of all connect.
Yeah, we're going to blow through these last few, but you segued into the next one, which is a junk defense, which is kind of what you're talking about with Coach Cobb. And I'm not saying his press was a junk defense, but what I'm saying is it made Buchtel slow down and think and make passes. And if you interject a junk defense into a game, commonly teams are like looking over to their coach. What should we run? What should we do? It slows teams down. It makes them lose their momentum. So it could be a situational thing to deploy, but it's overall, it's going to make teams stop and think. And then, some of the rest of these, Coach, are kind of just the inverse of some of the things that we've talked about already, where if you wanted to slow the game down, you would really sell out to transition defense. So we talked about offensively pounding the offensive boards to create more shots and more possessions. The opposite is true if you want to slow the game down, where you're sending all 5 guys back or 4 guys back on the shot attempt, and you're getting that defense just loaded up in the quarter court waiting for the other team to bring it down, so they're not getting any advantages in transition. And then we talked about earlier with the fouling. If you're trying to slow the game down, you would be wanting to take hard fouls at the basket to stop teams from scoring layups, more free throw attempts to slow the game down. This is more substitutions. This is more instructions. This is more setups as opposed to a free-flowing game. So I think that's all the concepts for how you would speed up or slow down a game with your offense or your defense. And now let's just have a brief discussion on how you might apply these, Coach. So let's do an exercise here where I'm loaded. I've got all kinds of talent at my disposal. I've got a size advantage. I've got a speed advantage against you, and I've got a talent advantage. And I'm going to try to press you, and I'm going to try to push the ball at you. What kind of thoughts are you having as how do I stay in this game against a team that I'm overmatched by? What kind of philosophy might you roll out?
But first of all, I'm going to go to my athletic director and make sure we don't schedule you anymore. That's going to be number one. Okay. But since I don't have that going for me tonight, right? I got to do this. Listen, if oh shit, God damn it.
Hey, Coach. Hey, Coach, I'm going to wrap this one up here. What we talked about here tonight is how to create a tempo that's conducive for your basketball team. So you want to think about this in terms of your overall philosophy, like what's our baseline style of play? And then you can tweak it from there where you're entering into each individual game where you might be able to slow the game down or speed the game up depending on what you need. But the overall philosophy here is to create a style of play that favors your team the best. And you do that by manipulating the game through your schemes and through your strategies that are going to give your team the best chance to succeed. All right, Coach Kramer, I'm not sure where you went, but thanks so much for joining me for an hour here. And we've had a lot of fun talking about tempo. And this is going to be part of our advanced coaching course that we're putting together, where we're breaking down some of our documents that we've written over time here and giving our people, our coaches, a better look at them. So thanks so much for joining us, guys. I'll catch you soon.